this past weekend, I watched Watchmen. And I talked about it probably a lot on Monday because it impacted me, because I never thought in my lifetime I would see a theatrical display or theatrical representation of Black Wall Street's destruction.
Yeah.
I never thought I would see that.
Yeah.
And it was masterful and chilling.
Yeah.
And just brilliantly done. And again, I can't speak enough about Watchmen. But I didn't misspeak, but I didn't have all of the knowledge of the opening scene, which is a black and white silent film. And I described it on the air. It's like, you know, a man on a black horse wearing all black, chasing a man on a white horse wearing all white.
Right.
And you're conditioned to think the man on the white horse is good.
Right.
And the man on the black horse is bad. And then it's further complicated when they get off the horses and the man in black wrangles the guy in white onto the ground, and he pulls off his mask and he's black. And then you're like, uh-oh.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, this is terrible. But then the white people, because it's a white town, are cheering the man in black. And you're going, what's going on here? This is weird.
Yeah. That's a masterful use of color-coded understanding and language.
In a black and white film.
Yeah, that's
right?
powerful.
But what I learned was that was real. The man in black was an actual person. The man in black's name is Bass Reeves, or it was Bass Reeves, who was the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. He was the first marshal west of the Mississippi River. And this is issue should know. We're not going to play that horrible thing. We're not playing that. This is issue should know. And he worked mostly in Arkansas and Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma Territory, which it was at the time. During his long career, he was credited with arresting more than 3,000 felons. He shot and killed 14 people in self-defense. A black man born into slavery in Arkansas in 1838. He was named after his grandfather, who was Bass Washington. Reeves and his family were enslaved in Arkansas, and when he was 8, he moved to Grayson County, Texas, near Sherman in Peters County, and he may have served William Steele Reeves' son, Colonel George Reeves, who was the sheriff and legislator in Texas and a one-time speaker of the Texas House of Representatives until his death. He died from rabies. That's just an aside. Okay. During the Civil War, Reeves' owner joined the Confederate Army, and he took Bass with him. And it's unclear exactly when, but Bass left. It's like, oh, what y'all fighting about?
I got to go.
I'm on the wrong side. Hold on. Wait a minute. And he and his owner apparently had an altercation. And Reeves severely beat his owner and then fled to Indian Territory.
All right, now Frederick Douglass tendencies.
How come? Let me just finish. He lived as a fugitive among the Cherokee, the Creeks, and the Seminoles, who, if they all band together, we might not be. Anyway, all right, Bass stayed in the Indian Territories and learned their language until he was freed by the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in 1865. And as a freedman, he moved to Arkansas and farmed near Van Buren, and he married Nellie Jenny from Texas, and they had 11 children, but he was one of the most successful deputy marshals in the west of the Mississippi. 3,000 felons, 14 people lost their lives at his hand, and that opening scene of Watchmen was real. And imagine that playing in the movie theater.
Yeah.
In Black Wall Street, in Tulsa, in Greenwood, and growing up as a little kid.
Yeah.
And your hero's dressed in black. And your hero's a black man, just like your daddy and your granddaddy and your uncles.
Right.
And the white people are cheering because he's come to the rescue. And imagine in this time in this country that a black man could kill 14 people.
Right. Arrest 3,000.
3,000.
Right.
Mostly white. Imagine that.
Because that was one of the questions I was
Imagine that, right?
Yeah.
So it begs the question about our history. It begs the question about what else don't we know. It begs the question about what else have they co-opted and flipped around, because I was born, raised up in a school system and through cinema to believe that the Lone Ranger, did I mention that? Bass Reeves is the Lone Ranger. That's who he was.
Wow.
Tonto, Native American, his sidekick, Bass Reeves, was the Lone Ranger. I never learned that.
Right.
So let me just thank the audience because they came out and it was like, did you know it was Bass Reeves? And I was like, no, let me Google search it. Let me find out who Bass Reeves is. And if you have children, but the willful rewriting of history and the willful switch from the black to the white.
Right.
The white hat comes, the white hood comes to rescue, to save. If that's the narrative, like how do we change that when that has been so much ingrained into our psyche to the point when I started watching it, I was like, oh, he's going to get in trouble. He's black.
Right. Right. I really think that scene and the discussion about Bass Reeves, I think that for me speaks to the power of cinema and the power of marrying visual images with audible sounds. And I was on a panel once, and one of the panelists was a neuropsychologist of some sort, some fancy scientist type person. And they were talking about the fact that the section of the brain that processes sight, that processes what you see, and the section of the brain that processes what you hear, when combined, it's one of the most powerful combinations of messaging, because it literally is capturing so many different portions of our ability to take in and understand what's happening. And he said that to say that is the power of film. And we were talking about the power of hip hop and the power of hip hop videos, because when you marry the images of fantasy that fantasize a certain type of blackness with the sound of the music and the beat, right? So with us, it's even added to that. So because our melanin is being activated by that rhythmic beat, the power of media is so phenomenal. And when I think about the first blockbuster film, Birth of a Nation, the 1915 version, it was a powerful calling card that resulted in the dramatic exponential increase in membership in the Ku Klux Klan, dramatic exponential increase in the incidences of racial violence vis-a-vis lynchings. Exactly. Because film, when you put the sight with the sound and you combine that into message format, it will create the ability to persuade and the ability to convince like no other form of messaging. Right. That's why even as a writer, I wish I were a filmmaker, because I know what I put in a book. If I could put it on a screen, I'm going to capture so many more people's imagination.
But I think even more than film is sound.
Yes.
Even more, because sound, like radio, which is why, I was even struggling about these cameras, because radio allows your imagination to kick in a way that your visual will never, ever. It fills in blanks and all this. And even though D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, not Nate Parker's great Birth of a Nation, was a silent film.
That's right.
It had music.
Yes.
And it also opens up with people on horseback. And I wonder if the Watchmen actually did that same opening with the horseback riding, but with the black person as the hero, as opposed to these white knights, which is what they called them, riding in to rescue white virtue in white, dressed in all white like heroes.
See, and what we know what happened from that film is that it spawned an entire industry of negative black imaging. So after that Birth of a Nation, the 1915 version, set the tone for how black people were going to be perceived in film for the entirety of Hollywood. That's the first blockbuster as we know it. So the entirety that we now know Hollywood to be. When you take film classes, even though Birth of a Nation is one of the most racist pieces of propaganda put out there, film classes study it because it was masterful at making use of the skills of film that were available at the time. So saying that to say, how do we change this? That is one of the reasons that I am heavily active in spaces where we are working to build pipelines of black filmmakers who are able to create a completely different form of imaging for black people. Something like Watchmen would be the ideal, being able to produce a pipeline of young people who know from in front of the camera, yes, as actors, but from behind the camera, as directors, as writers, as producers, as editors, who have a pipeline. We're trying to create an economy of filmmakers. So it's not just people who can write real good and who can pitch real well. We want you to have people to pitch to who are also a part of this economy. We want the people you're pitching to also have access to having it greenlit so it can actually move forward. Because the ability to control our image is one of the most powerful weapons we have. And the way we use it now, we are largely aiming the weapon against ourselves.
I keep saying we put bullets and guns pointed at us. How does that work out? Not well.